Welcome to our panel on using OER during COVID-19. Please note we are recording this panel. My name is Ruth Monier, she, hers. I am a learning outreach librarian here at Pittsburgh State University. Before we get started, feel free to please put your name and location in the chat and kind of give us where your experience is with OER. So go ahead and do that as we go through some housekeeping before we get truly into the fullness of the panel. If you need any assistance during today's event, please in the chat use the all panelists options and we will assist you that way. As a reminder, this is a university event. We are recording, so please act responsibly in the chat. If you have any technical issues, again, please chat to all panelists. Please post any questions that you have at any point into the Q&A option, which is below and next to your chat option in your Zoom toolbar. Again, please be kind and considerate to each other in the chat. We greatly appreciate it. Pittsburgh State Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology and Library Services welcomes you to our first event during Open Education Week. We thank you for your attendance, interest, and work in the field of open education. As we know, COVID-19 pandemic caused everyone to pivot around the globe. On March 17th, Governor Kelly of Kansas announced that K-12 schools were not opening for the remainder of the year. Kansas K-12 public students were just a portion of over 50 million public school students in the U.S. out of physical buildings last spring. As the crisis was in its infancy, people around the world rallied to support students and each other. For example, the project Translate a Story, which worked to translate open licensed children's reading books, an example of OER, into new language. It was a collaboration between Norway, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, the United Nations Refugee Agency, the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, the Global Book Alliance, Verizon, the Global Digital Library, and others, as well as Creative Commons. This is one example of many out there where individuals leverage OER during this crisis to support education. Open educational resources provide all educators with the opportunity to adapt materials to fit their needs. OER are teaching, learning, and research materials in the public domain or licensed in a manner that provides everyone with free and perpetual permission to engage in the material. OER is one facet of open education, where the goal is to make education more affordable and accessible to as many people as possible. This translated story, which I previously talked about, is a large-scale example of OER and its impact. However, today we're going to focus about our impact here at Pittsburgh State University. Today's panelists will explore these local examples and how OER in the midst of a pandemic. Our panelists will self-introduce themselves with their name, major or title, their pronouns, and their role with OER. We are going to start with Rion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rion Huffman. I am an associate professor of graphics and imaging technologies at Pittsburgh State University, and I've been kind of involved with OER for about 8 years, I suppose. And I am currently a Creative Commons certified facilitator, so I help facilitate courses in CC. And that's kind of one of my roles here today, is I'm just here to answer some questions, if need be, about Creative Commons or OER in general.
Thank you, Rion. We're going to go ahead and go to Goldie. And if our professors will introduce their students after they introduce them, or give it to their student after they introduce themselves.
Hi, thank you. My name is Goldie Prelogar, and I'm an instructor in the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences. My pronouns are she and her. What else did I, besides introducing my student, what else did you want to say?
What's your role with OER?
Well, this was my first time using OER, and I implemented a textbook to use in my course, and I'm looking to adapt that textbook and do some additional things as well. And I have Danny Nichols is here with me, and today she was in my course last semester where I utilized the OER textbook.
I'm Delaney Nichols, and I'm a FACS education major at Pitt State. And yeah, I took the course that Goldie was talking about where we had the textbook.
We're so glad you could join us today, Delaney. Barth?
I am Barth Cox. I'm an assistant professor in the comm department, communication department. My first time using OER was actually last spring when I adapted a textbook just like Goldie did in my classroom for a podcasting class. And my student is Kat Bailey, who is a grad student here at Pitt State. I'll let Kat introduce herself.
Hi there, I'm Kat Bailey, pronoun she, her, and I'm a media production graduate student, and I took Barth's podcasting class in the spring where we had a OER textbook.
Thank you to all of our panelists. We're so glad to hear from you, and we're continuing to hear from you. Our first question, we'll start with the faculty, and then we will ask the students a comparable question, so no worries. Our first question for our faculty, could you kind of describe your journey to OER and what led you to adapt an open textbook? And then also, how did that help or hinder during the midst of the pandemic? Let's start with Barth.
Okay. I had been aware of OER long before I adapted it. I just didn't really know where to start looking until I became involved with it last spring or prior to last spring. I had a instructional technologist when I was working at Tusculum College who had introduced me to the concept of OER way back like 10 years ago when it was in its more or less in its infancy. And over the years, I toyed with actually going ahead and looking for more material to help me with classes. And it wasn't until last spring when this textbook pretty much fell right into my lap. Ruth had helped me identify. I was teaching a podcasting class for the first time, and we were looking for a book. There was one book available through Focal Press, and it wasn't really bad. It was like in the $20-$30 range. But, I was like, okay, is there another way to do this? Is there something else we can do? And Ruth pointed me to this book by Jill Olmsted, Tools of Podcasting, that had actually just been released in January of that year. And it was really, it left a lot to be desired. I've used it now twice. I used it also in the summer. And by the time the summer came around, she had already began revising it and updating it. And it's a much more robust book than it was when I first started.
Thanks, Barth, for your insights. Goldie?
I saw Rion speak at a PD day. I think it might have been the first one he was talking about OER. Gosh, I want to say it was 4 years ago, something like that. He's done quite a bit. I've sat through some others as well, but that first one, he actually used my class as an example and pulled up a personal finance textbook, and I've adopted something similar to that. So I felt really hypocritical using an expensive textbook in a personal finance class. So every time I would stand up and introduce that first week of school, the textbook, I would say, you can try to get the 6th edition if you can't get the 7th edition or the 5th edition. You'll save some money. And this is the textbook that I was using. It's a Pearson textbook. And it's a fabulous textbook. Lots of support that went along with it. But the list price is $206. And I mean, you can find it. I looked it up before the panel because I wanted to see what it's currently going for. And it's about $165 on Amazon to purchase it. Now, that's not the rent price, but that's what it is to purchase it new through Amazon. And I teach, last year I looked it up, and I teach about 260 students per academic year. So when you multiply $165 by 260 students, I figured I'm saving Pitt State students almost $43,000. And that's really, for me, was putting my money where my mouth is when it comes to talking about budgeting and saving money and looking for opportunities for value as opposed to just the price of something. Like Barth, my textbook that I found is not perfect and mine hasn't been updated. However, I am finding OER resources, like I said earlier, in Next Gen Personal Finance has quite a few free resources. So I'm incorporating those to make the textbook and the content more robust and more modern.
Perfect. You both touched about your journey. What did you notice during the pandemic? And then we'll ask the students their question. So like, I mean, obviously it was sprung on us. Nobody predicted the pandemic. What was the benefits or disadvantages of using OER during that time? We'll start with Barth and then we'll go back to Goldie.
I can't think of really seriously any disadvantages at all. I mean, because I don't know about Goldie's, how her book was adapted, but my book was online, was completely online. And in fact, I actually took the book from online and moved it directly into Canvas so that they weren't even really going offline for the book. All they had to as long as they were able to get on Canvas, they had a full version of the book. Now, by the time I taught it in the summer, I had actually linked it back to the website because there were so many changes made between the time I taught it in the spring and the time I taught it in the summer that it made perfect sense to do that. But if anything, it was an advantage for them to be able to have it in one place.
Yeah, my textbook is entirely online, and I have a link to how to get to that both on my landing page in Canvas, as well as this semester I started when I send out the weekly announcement with all the requirements in it. I actually link to the chapter they're supposed to be reading, so there's no confusion. You just click the link and the chapter pops up in another window. I didn't do that last semester, but I found that it clarified a lot of things for my students. I'm like Barth, I think it was just an advantage. I didn't find any drawbacks. When students were having to move out of the dorms and go home, it was one less thing they had to take with them. They had access to it no matter where they were, even if they were trying to catch Wi-Fi at Starbucks or wherever. So I think it was all advantage.
Thank you guys both for your insights. And now to our students. We're going to start with going to Kat and then going to Delaney to keep the same order of which we had just talked about the last courses for everyone. So the first question is, you guys were in the class. Could you describe your experience of using OER in the course? Go ahead, Kat.
So I guess I found just using the OER textbook was basically just the same as using a regular paper textbook, just besides the fact that obviously it was free and I could access it online pretty much whenever. It was definitely a lot more handy to have as opposed to a physical textbook because of that you can access it anywhere sort of thing. But I really kind of just found it as another kind of an educational resource that's just the same as a textbook, I guess you could say. Definitely like in terms of facts and reliability and everything else.
Great, that's always good to hear. Delaney?
I agree with Kat. It's pretty much like a textbook, but it was also nice because you can never be like, oh, I forgot my textbook, so you can't do a homework assignment. It's right there and you have everything you need in your little computer, your iPad, or anything you're doing it on. So that was always nice to have everything in one place.
That's good. Both Barth and Goldie kind of touched upon the fact of cost savings that are happening, and that's important to them to help you guys as students. Obviously, you guys didn't have to pay for one. If that hypothetical money that Goldie just talked about, like that book would have been over $100. How did that impact, like not having to pay for a book? How did that impact you and your life, even pre-pandemic, before we transitioned to going online or remote?
Well, I was able to spend that money on like gas to go home, to go to the doctors, like anything I needed money for. So that was nice, and I could put it towards my other classes that didn't have these textbooks, because not all of them do have the free textbook option. So it was nice to save a little bit of money where I can.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the cost part really came into play just because we didn't have a textbook cost, but because of the pandemic, we couldn't come in to record these podcasts. So it was almost like we kind of needed to find equipment to use on our own, since the labs and the audio booths that we would have usually used would not be available to us. And so that became definitely a big plus. And oh, I didn't spend the money on this textbook. Maybe that means I can put it towards a nicer microphone or editing software.
That's a great point, Kat. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Delaney, for also sharing. I have a last follow-up before we switch back to a question for the professors. During the pandemic, Professor Goldie kind of mentioned supplementing her materials, other OER. Did you on your own use any OER outside of your courses? So did you seek out some maybe freely available information from YouTube or Khan Academy or anything of that nature to kind of deepen your understanding in any of your courses, not just these two courses that you were in last spring? And we're going to start with Delaney.
Yes, I definitely did. I love Khan Academy and YouTube, because sometimes you just need a little bit of reinforcement on a topic and like different ways of saying it. So it was always nice to just be able to at any time to look deeper into things.
Yeah, I'm actually not familiar with the Khan Academy, but YouTube was definitely a big resource for me, especially in other classes, because they wouldn't have any sort of a textbook or an OER. They would just have nothing. And so it would be, I have to find my own information if I want to kind of get through this class in the middle of this pandemic, and where, the situation wasn't the best sort of thing.
I think we all can agree that we prefer not to have pandemic life. I think you're 100% right there, Kat. So we're going to go back to the professors. Thank you both, Delaney and Kat, for your insights there. What support did you feel like you had and did receive in adapting OER to your courses? And then through that process, maybe if you did mark your course as ZTC, which here at our university means zero textbook costs, in the registrar, tell us a little bit about that process as well. And we're going to start with Goldie.
Because it was just a textbook adoption, I didn't feel like there was a lot of technology challenges for me. Like I said, I did reach out and find some additional OER materials to use. I did message our CTLT staff a couple times over the summer, I think, and kind of as we transitioned to get into the fall, because that was also a time where everything was kind of up in the air. And, all of the different programming that they put on, I felt like was really helpful. And I did mark this as ZTC, zero textbook cost in my class. And, I don't know, I haven't studied whether or not students are drawn to zero textbook classes, but I would be, as someone who is sort of, very interested in money. So it would definitely draw my eye if I were a student. And so I hope that it's a good way of also recruiting students to our classes.
I guess it's my turn. All of my classes, by the way, just as a FYI, all of my classes are ZTC. So regardless of whether I have an OER or not, I won't say I inherited, I did inherit a number of classes that already had a ZTC classification. So there's no textbooks. None of the students are buying textbooks in AR classes. And just like Goldie had mentioned, many of the, like the Zettel book, which is the basic book that is used for basic video production. It's one that we often tried to teach out of. It's a little book. I mean, it's literally like about this thick. Let me get about that thick, right? It's about maybe 300 pages, and it goes for $160. And, so we were, as the prices of them of textbooks began to go up and up and up, our part, the media production part of the department, began to decide that the best way to do this was not to have them students keep investing in textbooks. As far as support, Ruth was a lot of help towards helping me identify books. And she's been helping me all along try to identify more stuff in all the classes that I teach. Some it's been easier than others. This one was like the easiest of all because it was a full textbook. But it has really helped a lot. And, that really helped a lot in terms of identifying stuff. I meet with Ruth probably once, every 3 or 4 weeks, about every 6 weeks. And, Ruth's going, what do you need? Okay, here's what I need. And we're back and forth. So having that type of relationship is wonderful in terms of helping identify material. And also the CTLT people helped a lot. And once we identified the book and once we were able to start putting it in, but I didn't have a lot of, like Goldie, it was not a lot of technological issues. It was just simply, what I do when I work with Canvas in general. Create a page and place that content, move the content from the website onto the page. And, and make sure that, it was all Creative Commons, so I could do that. There was two other things that was nice about doing it that way is I was able to take entire pages where it might have been not quite so robust, and I was able to go in and add content to it. Some of the things like her list of royalty-free like music sources for students to be able to use was really scant. And I was able to like greatly increase that. And there were other areas where I was able to add content to it because of the way it was licensed. It allowed me to be able to add material to it and to be able to extend what she had done. So, but it was nothing outside of what I would normally have done, with all the rest of my courses that are ZTC,
Thanks for your in-depth explanation. I feel like I need to also say thank you I'm glad I'm helpful, but I also did not tell Barth to say that. So just as an FYI, it's all unfiltered. The other follow-up question to that, because we did mention Barth and Goldie's classes were both marked as a ZTC. For Delaney and Kat, did that make a difference in your selection to choosing their course to go to? And we're going to start with Kat.
So the ZTC designation, I guess when it comes down to it, it's not like I have a substitute course to take if I want to learn about this sort of thing, but a ZTC in general definitely will draw me to one class over the other if they're kind of, if they're similar or one is substitutable for the other easily. I think that will definitely play a role, kind of subconsciously of what I'm thinking when I'm choosing a course.
That's a great point. Thanks, Kat. Delaney?
Yeah, I agree with her. There's not a lot of options to go from. You do your classes that are on your major, but it definitely helps a lot. If you're gonna think about gen eds, of course, about which one to take if there's not a textbook, because it's a lot of money when it all starts to add up. So helps out if there's not one there.
Perfect. Back to the professors for a new question. How did you let your students know about OER? Did you include any resources within your course or discuss it in class? Just how did you let them know? We're going to start with Goldie.
Yeah, so mine is, I have a link to the book, and actually there's 2 different links that will get you to the same place. So I used both of them in my syllabus and on my landing page in Canvas. So it's like the first thing you see basically, and you can click on that. I just kind of let them know, I think one of the first days of class, that we would be using a free textbook, and that I would be adding to it through lecture. so that the materials that were in the textbook were good and valuable, but there's still value in coming to class. So if you come to class, I will try to make it relevant and much more useful for everyday finance, pretty much. And like I said, I am now putting it in each announcement with their weekly to-dos. I think one less thing with the pandemic and everything going on, I think students and faculty too are just a little overwhelmed with life in general. And so anything that puts it right there in front of them, they can just click on it, read through it, take the reading check. Just simplifies their life and mine. So, thank you.
Perfect. Barth?
Goldie, I agree with you 100% about whatever could make it simpler for students. I did almost exactly the same thing. The book was moved into Canvas, so I had the entire book separated out week by week, what was needed to be read for each week. I had links to the actual book, so if students wanted to go back to the book rather than use the Canvas, they could go to the website, which was just another way of them being able to get to the material. So if they were having problems getting it from Canvas, they still had another way to get the material. And that's basically it basically took care of itself after that.
That's good to hear. Now for Delaney and Kat, a couple questions for you, so don't worry. Did OER have an impact on your education? And if so, explain. And then also follow that up with, would you recommend and or are you using OER after your experience in the course? And we're going to start with Delaney.
I would say that it did have an impact on my education just because it was a part of my course, and so I got to read it and learn from it, and so definitely impacted my learning. And I would recommend it, and I will probably use it just because I think it should be implemented in every course so it's more accessible for everybody. Because I know in the past textbook cost, if I think the less important class, I would try to not get a textbook for that class because I didn't have enough money to budget in the course for that. But so having them all free would be more education to receive for people instead of having to make those tough decisions of which courses to get the textbook and which ones not to. So definitely recommend it.
Ruth, can I follow up with her for just a second? Okay, so you're going to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. Would you use this type of material in your courses?
Yes, I would. And especially just because I know it is useful. So I didn't know it existed until I took Goldie's class last semester. So I'm glad I know about it now.
We're glad too. Delaney, we're going to keep you on the spot for one moment longer. Okay. You said you would definitely use some in the future. Is there certain ones that you're feeling go to in your professional life or as you're continuing on as a student that you're more apt to go to or that you're more familiar with at this point?
I know you mentioned YouTube earlier, like the Khan Academy and everything like that. And I'll keep going back to that because I've been using YouTube since I can remember to learn things, because sometimes the disconnect of teachers and students, you fall back behind a little bit. It's helpful to keep up with the class.
Perfect. I am going to put a caveat that the YouTube, you'll need to search for Creative Commons licensing. Otherwise, I feel like Rion Huffman might jump out at the screen at me. So just make sure not the entirety of the platform, but some of the platform is.
Okay.
All right, Kat, do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
I was like, it's been a bit. How did OER have an impact on your education? If yes, explain. So feel free to go more in depth there. Would you recommend or personally be using OER after this experience?
Okay, so I definitely think it did impact my education because it taught me a lot more about podcasting and it definitely was helpful when I was setting up my own and going through all of that and all the things that go along with it. I found it was definitely really useful, and especially in the time of a pandemic where you can't just kind of go see your professor very easily, it was definitely a really great a great resource to have and go to. It's definitely something I would recommend to someone because it's not just like a free resource, but it's also a lot more sustainable than physical textbooks. Like, not only is it not costing these students like hundreds of dollars, but it's less paper, it's less cardboard, and it does mean that it's easily accessible too. You don't have to lug it around. And I think that's just one of the ways that it's definitely has a big foot up over regular kind of the paper textbooks.
Those are great points, Barth. We had Goldie follow up. Do you have any follow-ups before we move on to the next question for Kat?
No, not really. What Kat is saying is actually, I'd already known. She's not, I don't think Kat's going to be teaching.
That's fair. Just wanted to offer. This next question is for Barth and Goldie, and we'll start with Barth. Did you utilize any other OER resources besides the open textbooks? So did you use PowerPoints, worksheets, quizzes, other videos from other places? I feel like we kind of touched upon it, but let's have it for the record.
For the record, this book did not come with a lot of material. It did have a separate, it had a page, the entire textbook that was like a student version of it. And there was also a faculty version. But I found for the most part that the material that was on the faculty version just pulled directly from the book. So there were examples on, this is a bumper, this is how you would create, this is what a bumper sounds like. And those same examples were in the textbook. So, I mean, it was there to be much more convenient for me if I was actually doing, because by the time we got to recording bumpers and recording, intros and outros on their pieces, we were in pandemic mode. So, obviously in a regular classroom, it may have been helpful, but, it really wasn't for me in the way that we were set up for the pandemic.
That's fair. Goldie?
Again, my textbook didn't come with anything. Mine's a little older. So the one thing that it did have is it had some questions at the end that could be used for exams, or I used some of them for reading checks just to make sure that they were following along and they were getting the material. So other than that, I had to create a lot of my own, and then I incorporated some of the learning materials from something called Next Gen Personal Finance. But other than that, no, I mean, it was just like getting a new textbook from some place that didn't offer any of those faculty resources. So it was just kind of starting over, but it wasn't bad.
Can I piggyback on one more thing? One of the things that I found with my textbook was Jill Olmstead is actually in a group. She's in BEA, Broadcast Education Association, and she is a member of the audio subgroup of that organization, and they do a Facebook page. And for example, a lot of my students were using Discord for making their podcasts rather than Zoom, and she didn't have a section on Discord. So I reached out to her through that, and she was like extremely happy to hear that first that we were using the book, and also that we were giving her ideas to improve the book. And sometimes that's the thing, is most of these people are faculty members at other institutions, and they're really they are like super happy to hear from us, whenever we're able to reach out to them and get, tell them this is what's happening in our classroom, and you may want to consider it when you update it.
That's a great point, and that the willingness of open is that collaborative movement within the open education. You guys both mentioned doing some changes or adapting it to fit your needs. So I'm wondering, did your students do any of that, where locating or sharing of OER materials as a part of assignment or project within your course? And if they did they make it under open licensing terms? So using some Creative Commons terms, license to do so. So we'll start with Goldie.
I did not have any, mine's a freshman level course, so I don't have anything along those lines. So I will just defer to Barth on this one.
In terms of actually making changes to the book, the student or assignments, the students did not. Now, their podcast, one of the things that they had to do with their podcast was either they had to pay royalties for any music or sound effects that they used, or they were, which is their requirement, or they had to use either public domain or CC attribution or attribution non-commercial resources. So they were aware, and we did a section on Creative Commons in the class because it is an important part of most of the media classes at this point.
Perfect. We're going to follow up with Kat on that. How was finding some music available? Did you go with a royalty option? Did you go with public domain? Tell us about that.
So I definitely went with the Creative Commons because obviously I wasn't wanting to pay for, music because it's so expensive. Like Barth went over kind of the cost of how like even the tiniest amounts of music would cost. And it's like, wow, it's a really good thing that public domain and the Creative Commons are available, because otherwise it would just be almost impossible to find music. So I did, and I was really happy with how wide of a variety I had to choose from of music to use.
That's great. And was it hard to find any of those sources, or pretty easy for you?
It was pretty easy. Barth did provide us with some good websites to search through, and other resources where we could easily kind of locate the royalty-free music.
We always like to hear that it's good and you had no problems, and you got to save some money. That's always good, important things. I'm going to take a quick pause here. I haven't seen any questions come up, but I just want to give any attendees a moment to answer if they have any questions. I know we're getting closer to the end. We do have a couple more questions on our end, but I want to make sure if you're an attendee, feel free to, if you have any questions, to type those in. We are happy. We'll be asking for those here in a moment if you have any more. Okay, so I'm going to give that a moment. I'm going to keep an eye out on that. Since we just talked to our professors, we're going to go back to our student representatives. And this hopefully is not a tricky question. But how would you describe OER to a fellow student? And we're going to start with Delaney.
Well, I would describe it basically just as a free, all I know is like a free textbook and free, an alternative to a textbook that you would buy, or just free resources that you can use. That's it, yeah.
That's fair. It's just always interesting. And you're obviously involved in it. And so sometimes you're so involved, it's hard to see how would you articulate that to others.
Yeah.
And we are putting you on the spot, and we realize that. So we appreciate your definition, and it's your definition, and you think all of your friends and fellow students would understand that freely, an alternative to a traditional paper book. Okay, perfect. All right, Kat, how would you describe OER to a fellow student?
Kind of going off of what Delaney said, it's an alternative to a paper textbook, essentially like a free online sort of textbook, a free digital textbook. And it's basically a different way to learn aside from, that's not this $100 big chunk of paper sort of thing. And that it's pretty easy to search, to find, I guess you could say. And so it's easy to find, and it's free, and it's online sort of thing.
Perfect. I was wondering if you were going to expand your definition to include music, because you also had music experience.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, you can still add, but what was your gut instinct?
Definitely online, like an online textbook or online learning resources sort of thing. It's just like, it's an extended way of learning that's free.
Free is important. Thank you both for your great definitions of how you would explain it to somebody else. We're going to go back to our faculty members. Did you receive student feedback about the adopted OER in your courses, either through surveys, one-on-one conversations, general classroom? Doesn't have to be real data driven in your response for this, but what was sort of the feedback that you had if you received feedback? And we're going to start with Barth.
Because this was done through the CTLT OER program, there was a survey attached to it, and we did receive the survey back, and it was positive. The students had a lot of positive things to say about it.
That's great to hear. I'm glad it was a good experience for them. Goldie?
Yeah, we did the same survey at the end of my course last fall, and it was overwhelmingly positive. Especially with freshman level, they're probably taking 4 or 5 classes, and anything that cuts back on what they have to carry around and what they have to pay for, I think was really probably impactful. So yeah, I would say I was happy. I had to throw some points at that survey to get everybody to take it. But other than that, yeah, it worked pretty well. Yeah.
They were also in the middle of the pandemic. We can give some extra grace. All right, our next questions. Feel free again if you have any questions as an attendee to either put them in the chat or the Q&A function. We're going to keep going with faculty before we go to students. Students, you will have a comparable one, so just prepare to start thinking. Give you some extra thinking time after we put you on the spot with the last one. Faculty, what is your future goals with OER beyond your current course usage? And we're going to start with Goldie.
I'm actually really excited about this question because, Ruth, you pointed out, I had reached out to you, I think it was last semester, the end of last semester, about coming up with some additional resources for professional or for personal finance, since there are so many students that take that class. And you mentioned that, hey, the textbook you are using right now is already non-commercial share alike. So I could go in and adapt it to my needs and put in current information, because with the CARES Act and all the other legislation that has come through, we've had stimulus and we've had affects your taxes. So being able to just update my textbook every year with the newest legislation, the newest tax information, I mean, is just, I hadn't even thought about that before. I know Rion had talked about it, but it just seems so far out of my scope of the things that I do that once I wrapped my head around, I can literally make this perfect for my class every year. Is just really exciting. So that got me kind of thinking about some of my other courses. And so I have a family financial planning class, and moving away from a book in that class and bringing in different resources that I find that are Creative Commons in some capacity that I can also adapt to be specific for my students. And even, with the things that are going on, current events, you can then adapt it to current events. I mean, with the GameStop thing that happened a month ago, my students were all like asking me investing questions all of a sudden. So being able to adapt it to their current interests as well, so that it's just, just in time education is really exciting. So that's kind of where I'm headed with some of this.
That sounds amazing. I love that phrase, just-in-time education. I feel like a lot of times educators hear that thing maybe more K-12 oriented of when am I going to use this? And OER and Creative Commons licensing really allows you to address that as soon as it happens. I'm sure we could give Rion a platform on that. Rion, do you want to chime in before we go to Barth?
Thank you. Like, you could sense me wanting to chime in. I want to say, like, that to me, as long as I've been involved with OER, like hearing Goldie's story, just, that's exactly what we collectively, in the open family really want to hear, is that the book works, and then, hey, I can also adapt this to make it be what I need in the future. I mean, can you imagine, even when like we were kids in grade school, if you were reading a book or doing something in high school or anything, and then something like the GameStop thing happens, you could incorporate that for the very next semester, and all of a sudden it's like you're reading about something that just happened and applying it to what you're learning. And it's like, that was unheard of, even 10 years ago. It would just be like, oh, well, what happened 20 years ago? We're going to learn about that now, and this is, like you said, right in time. And it's so exciting to hear about that.
Yes, it is very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out, Goldie. But on to Barth. What are your future plans with OER?
I want to piggyback on something that Ryan said. Also, like, I think that what is happening with the book that I've been using is Jill's been getting money probably during the summer to do updates on it. And I'm waiting to see, because I'm going to be teaching podcasting again this coming spring. And I'm waiting to see what she does this summer, because the updates she did this summer, like she introduced in the book, like in the first chapter, talked about Michelle Obama's podcast, which had just opened up like 3 months before. So it's really kind of amazing how fast, and especially because most of this is put in digital, digital form. It can be uploaded, it can be changed very quickly. And I'm really looking forward to see what she does before I teach it next spring. I am going to use the book again. I plan to use it. And I am also, because of the way it's licensed, I think it is CC non-commercial. I'm going to be looking at what I can do to add to it, and in those areas where it may not have been, it's not completely robust, to try to make it much more thorough and much more up to date. But I'm waiting to see what she does, because she's done a lot of work recently on it. I'm not going to, I don't want to reinvent the wheel if it's already being invented. I'm also looking at, and this, Ruth, because we've been talking for this forever, trying to find OER content for the rest of the classes I teach, for documentary, for the intro to AV class, for commercial or corporate promotional video. The students are asking for a narrative in a 480 next semester. I haven't made up my mind if that's the one I want to do, but if that's what we're going to do, Kat likes that idea. If that's the one that I'm going to do, I'm going to be looking for an OER for that. Any way that we can cut costs for students, I think is important, and have this nice prepackaged book that's ready to roll,
Perfect. Thank you both for your future goals. Now we're turning the question to Kat and Delaney with some modifications, of course. What are your future goals with OER? And maybe you haven't thought a lot about it. So do you plan on accessing open educational resources to broaden your knowledge of course content? Kat, are you going to do a regular podcast and maybe do openly licensed music? What do you think you're planning on now in the future for OER? And we're going to start with Delaney.
So I definitely have a lot more to learn about this, like with everything it offers. But like Goldie said, I am going to be a future teacher, so it'll be nice to learn about how it works and more things I can use for my students and any lesson plans that I create. It'll also be good for finishing my school and any future school after that, of just learning and better understanding the topics presented. But it'll be good for my students too, because then they can carry that on to college and so forth.
I love the ripple effect there, Delaney. Loving it. The impact here. So if somebody in 20 years asks, when did your OER journey start? And you're going to say Goldie, and it's going to be...
it was Goldie.
Going to be amazing. Kat, how about you? What are you thinking?
Well, I definitely don't really know what's in store for me in the future, but it's in my mind now, and it's kind of like it's going to be an option and it's going to always be an option, which is really awesome, because you kind of think, you know, oh, the realm of this class is really all I'm going to get out of this, but it's like there's so much more, and it'll always kind of be there. So it's like, it's kind of like a thing that now it's like, if I want to broaden my horizon on something, it's like, oh, I can search here, you know, I can start to look here, sort of thing.
I love your philosophy of lifelong learning with open educational resources, Kat. That's amazing. That's the end of our questions. I'm going to give about a minute or so to anybody in the chat. But while we're doing that, we do have, Rion has some information he wants to share with the rest of us. So if you have any questions for the panelists at all, please use this time to let us know. While Rion, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thanks for having me today. I appreciate the chance to be here. And as the attendees are thinking of questions, yeah, if you have any CC or OER questions also, I'm happy to do my best to answer those. I'm not an encyclopedia, but I do try my best. So what I wanted to share with you is that I had previously mentioned I am what's called a Creative Commons Certificate Facilitator. It's a mouthful. Creative Commons hosts a certificate course for those that want to learn not just more about Creative Commons, but about open access and OER in general, and how to apply these types of things. And it's kind of an intensive course. Ruth is in it right now, right now. Ruth is taking it right now, and not from me. I only teach it in the summer. But it's kind of an intensive course. It's 10 weeks. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a $500 tuition to be able to get into it. So there's some hurdles to climb. So what we thought at PSU and CTLT is, maybe people are kind of interested in that, but they don't really totally know what to expect, that type of thing. So what we're going to be doing is next week, we're going to host a CC certificate primer, kind of a course where you can, I'll just basically take you through what to expect when you're going through that course, to kind of give people an idea of, is it something I want to do or not? I can tell you that even me as a facilitator, not having to do the work, it's enough work on me teaching it that I only do it in the summer. I don't, do it during the school year, because it would be too much. So it's a significant amount of work, but when you come out of it, the thing, I think Ruth is probably figuring this out right now, just through the Slack channels, you are really part of an open family across the entire world. I mean, it is an international community of people, practitioners from anything you could think of. They teach all subjects. There's librarians, there's administrators, there's teachers, just everyone that you could possibly ask. Oddly enough, I just had a question come into me last week and through email, and I said, well, let me just check. I popped it out on Slack to my global Creative Commons group of like 4,500 people, I think, are in that group. And I had an answer in like 60 seconds. It was just like that. Something that, I couldn't have even found through Google, that these people found because they knew the specific thing. So it's a really interesting group to be a part of. And the CC Cert Primer course is just kind of a, an introductory thing to figure out, do I want to look at this in the future or not? And that is, of course, I don't have it right in front of me. What is it? The 8th?
It is Monday, March 8th and Wednesday, March 10th. You want to go to both sections. One sign up, which is popped in the chat. It is 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern, or I'm sorry, 3:30 to 5 p.m. Central Time for both of those dates. I will also echo Rion in saying that if you are interested in the normal certificate course, it is a lot of work. And so this primer is a good way before you pay that cash and put in that time to see if it's really what you want to do, and also maybe figure out when it would work best with your schedule in terms of the intensity. I currently am still not seeing any questions, which is fine. So hopefully that means we answered everybody's questions through the course of our dialogue today. And I know we are coming up upon our time when we said we would be finished. So we're on time, which is always fabulous. And everyone I know likes a little less time on Zoom these days. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you for everyone who's attended and anyone who watches the recording later. Big round of applause for our panelists. We are really excited that Kat, Barth, Goldie, and Delaney and Rion could all be with us today and share their expertise and their experiences with us. It's really important that we hear all sides of the story. So I want to give an extra shout out to students, both Delaney and Kat, because I mean, I haven't sat on that end of the table in a really long time, and it's helpful to know what you guys know. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy days. And again, we invite everyone to attend the primer course next week with Rion. The chat is there. If you're a PSU instructor here at Pittsburgh State University, remember you can still sign up for tomorrow's OER Basics, which is at 12:30, which will be on focusing on locating and selecting materials for your course. If you have any further questions about OER, either adopting it for your course or anything else, feel free to contact me at my email or Jennifer Persley over at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology. Other than that, thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad you could come today, and welcome to the Open family if you haven't been here. And if you are always part of the Open family, we're glad that you're still with us. Have a great one, everyone.